Everything my family knew about my wedding was wrong. I'm Madison Chen. And 2 weeks ago, I was sitting alone in my backyard at midnight, staring at a guest list that had more crossed out names than confirmed ones. The fairy lights I'd strung between the oak trees cast a soft glow over the space where I planned to say, I do. The same space my mother had called embarrassing just hours earlier. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with my wedding. It starts with my brother's wedding 2 years ago, when I learned exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy of love and respect. It was a Saturday morning when my sister-in-law Emma called to discuss the wedding party lineup. Madison, honey, she said in that sweet voice that always preceded bad news, we've decided to go with just family for the bridesmaids. And well, your mum suggested maybe you could help with the guest book instead. I remember standing in my tiny apartment kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup as the words sank in. Just family, I repeated. But I am family. Of course you are. Sweetie, it's just that, well, your mum mentioned you might not fit the aesthetic they're going for. You know how photos are so important for social media these days? The aesthetic, I knew exactly what that meant. My brother David had landed a corporate job straight out of college, and Emma came from old money. The kind of family where wedding budgets started at 6 figures and conversations revolved around country club memberships and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Then there was me, the middle child who chose teaching over finance, who shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom, who drove a 10-year-old Honda instead of leasing a BMW every 2 years. David's wedding was everything my parents had dreamed of, and everything they used to remind me I couldn't provide. The ceremony took place at the Riverside Country Club with 200 guests, a live orchestra, and centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent. I spent the day smiling for photos while wearing a dress I'd bought on sale, watching my parents beam with pride as they introduced David and Emma to their friends. This is how you do a wedding, my mother whispered to me during the reception, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. Elegance, class, something the whole family can be proud of. I nodded and sipped my champagne, trying to ignore the way her words felt like tiny knives. Every compliment about David's choices felt like criticism of mine. Every proud smile directed at the happy couple felt like disappointment saved for me. The pattern continued after the wedding. Family dinners became showcases for David and Emma's achievements. Their new house in the suburbs, their European honeymoon, Emma's promotion at her father's law firm. Meanwhile, my stories about my students or my volunteer work at the animal shelter were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. Madison, dear, when are you going to find someone serious? My mother would ask during these gatherings. You're 32? Your biological clock is ticking, and good men don't wait forever. When I finally did meet someone serious, my now husband, Jake, a carpenter who built custom furniture and volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, the questions shifted. What does he do for work? Was always the first one, followed by barely concealed disappointment when I explained his profession. Oh, that's nice. Very hands-on. Jake was everything I hadn't known I was looking for. He was kind, funny, and had calloused hands that told stories of honest work. He listened when I talked about my students, celebrated my small victories, and never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. When he proposed on a hiking trail overlooking the city with a simple but beautiful ring he'd saved for months to buy, I felt more joy than I'd ever experienced in those perfectly orchestrated family gatherings. But when I called my parents to share the news, the first words out of my mother's mouth weren't congratulations. They were, Does he have savings? Madison, you need to think practically about these things. Marriage is a partnership, and you can't live on love alone. He's a good man. Mom, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He makes me happy. Happy doesn't pay for a mortgage. Sweetheart, just make sure you know what you're getting into. That conversation should have prepared me for what came next. But somehow I still believed, hoped, that when it came to my wedding, my family would put aside their judgments and celebrate with me. I was so incredibly naive. The trouble started when Jake and I began talking about our wedding budget. We had saved up $5,000, money that represented months of careful planning, skipped dinners out, and extra weekend jobs. It wasn't much by my family's standards, but it was ours, earned through our own hard work and sacrifice. 5,000, my mother repeated when I mentioned the number during a family dinner. Madison, Emma's dress alone cost more than that. How are you going to have a real wedding with $5,000? It'll be perfect for what we want. I insisted. We're thinking something small and intimate. Maybe in our backyard. We have that beautiful oak tree, and I could string lights. The silence that followed was deafening. My father looked up from his plate for the first time that evening, his eyebrows raised in what I'd learned to recognize as his Madison is being ridiculous again expression. A backyard wedding, Emma said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they encounter something they consider quaint. That's very Pinterest of you. Backyard weddings are for people who can't afford real venues, my mother said flatly. What will people think? What will we tell our friends? You'll tell them that your daughter is getting married and you're happy for her, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how naive they sounded. David cleared his throat. Madison, I'm sure Mum and Dad would be happy to help with the costs if you wanted to do something more traditional. There's that new event centre downtown, or we could look into the country club again. We don't want help, I said firmly. We want to pay for our own wedding with our own money. But sweetheart, my mother said, leaning forward with that concerned expression that always preceded her most hurtful comments. You're representing the family. This isn't just about you anymore. When people come to your wedding, they're going to judge us too. They're going to think we couldn't afford to give our daughter a proper celebration. I felt Jake's hand find mine under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in silent support. Maybe they'll think you raised a daughter who values love over luxury, I said quietly. My mother's laugh was sharp and humourless. Oh, Madison, you always were too idealistic for your own good. That was the moment I realised that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. I could have the most beautiful, heartfelt celebration in the world, and it would still be embarrassing to them because it wasn't expensive enough to meet their standards. But I pressed on, foolishly believing that once they saw our plans coming together, once they understood how much thought and love we were putting into every detail, they would come around. I spent weeks creating a detailed vision board, pricing out flowers from the farmer's market, researching photographers who were just starting out and needed portfolio pieces. I called my mother 3 weeks before the wedding to go over the final guest count. So we're expecting about 60 people, I told her excitedly. Jake's family is so supportive. His mum even offered to make her famous apple pies for dessert instead of us buying an expensive cake. 60 people, my mother repeated slowly. In your backyard, it's going to be beautiful. Mum, I promise, we're renting tables and chairs, and Sarah's helping me make centerpieces with sunflowers and mason jars. It'll be rustic but elegant. Another pause. Then, Madison, I need to be honest with you. Your father and I have been talking, and we don't think we can attend. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually had to sit down. my legs suddenly unable to support me. What do you mean you can't attend? It's my wedding. Sweetheart, try to understand our position. Your father's colleagues, our friends from the club, they all expect a certain standard from our family events. A backyard wedding with mason jars. It's just not who we are. But I'm who you are, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'm your daughter. You're making a choice to have this type of wedding, she said, her tone becoming sharper. And we're making a choice not to be part of something that doesn't reflect our values. I wanted to argue, to fight, to demand that she explain how her own daughter's happiness didn't reflect their values. But instead, I just said, I see, I'm embarrassed for you. Madison, I really am. You're setting yourself up for judgment and disappointment, and you're dragging the family name down with you. After I hung up, I sat in my living room for over an hour, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. My parents weren't coming to my wedding, not because they couldn't, but because they were embarrassed by me. Jake found me there when he got home from work, still in his dusty jeans and work boots, and immediately knew something was wrong. When I told him about the conversation, he sat beside me and pulled me into his arms without saying a word. We stayed like that for a long time, and I realised that his simple presence offered more comfort than my family had given me in years. The calls from the rest of the family started the next day. David called first, his voice carefully neutral. Madison, Mum told me about the conversation. I think maybe if you reconsidered the venue. I'm not reconsidering anything, I said firmly. This is our wedding. We planned it with love and care, and it's going to be beautiful. But you have to understand their position. They move in certain social circles, and appearances matter, more than their daughter's happiness. A long pause. I just think there might be a compromise here. But there was no compromise. Over the next few days, one by one, my extended family called with various excuses. My aunt had a sudden conflict with her book club. My uncle wasn't feeling well. My cousins had prior commitments they'd somehow forgotten about. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial concern for my feelings, followed by gentle suggestions that maybe I should reconsider, ending with regret that they just couldn't make it work. None of them were honest enough to say what my mother had said, that they were embarrassed by me. The final blow came from my grandmother, the woman who had helped raise me while my parents worked long hours building their careers. "Oh, honey," she said when I called to confirm her attendance, "I just don't think I'm up for an outdoor event at my age. Maybe next time you'll have it somewhere more appropriate." Next time, as if my marriage was a practice run for a real wedding that would meet their standards. That night, Jake found me in the backyard, standing under the oak tree where we planned to exchange vows in just 2 weeks. I had been crying, not the dramatic sobs of movie heartbreak, but the quiet, steady tears of deep disappointment. They're not coming, I told him simply. He didn't ask who or why. He just wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. "I'm sorry. Mad," he said quietly. "You deserve so much better than that." "Maybe they're right," I whispered. "Maybe this is embarrassing. Maybe I should have just accepted their help and done what they wanted." Jake turned me around to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Look at me," he said firmly. "Do you remember why we decided to have the wedding here?" I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Because this is where we had our first kiss. Because this is where you proposed. Because it's ours. And do you remember what you said when we started planning? About how you wanted our wedding to feel like us? Not like some performance for other people?" "Yes. Then nothing has changed except that we'll have more room for the people who actually want to celebrate with us." He was right, but it still hurt. The guest list that had once seemed perfectly sized now felt sparse. The intimate celebration I'd envisioned suddenly seemed small and sad, like a consolation prize rather than a choice. But as I stood there in the space where we would promise to love each other forever, surrounded by the fairy lights I'd hung with such hope and excitement, I made a decision. I would not let their absence diminish our joy. I would not let their embarrassment become my shame. Our wedding would be exactly what we wanted it to be, full of love, laughter, and the people who truly cared about our happiness. And if that embarrassed my family, that said everything about them and nothing about us, I just had no idea that in 2 weeks, everything would change in a way I never could have imagined. The morning of our wedding arrived with perfect September weather, crisp but warm, with golden sunlight filtering through the oak tree's branches, exactly the way I'd dreamed it would. I woke up in Sarah's guest room, having followed the tradition of not seeing Jake before the ceremony, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely excited instead of anxious. Sarah knocked on the door at 7 a.m. with coffee and a huge smile, ready to become Mrs. Madison, as I sipped my coffee and looked out at the backyard where our small army of friends was already setting up tables and arranging the sunflower centerpieces we'd made the night before. I realized something had shifted inside me. The hurt from my family's rejection was still there, but it no longer felt like the defining element of this day. You know what? I told Sarah, I actually am ready. The transformation of our backyard was already underway. Jake's college roommate Mike was stringing additional lights between the trees, while his sister Emma, the good Emma, as I'd come to think of her, arranged chairs in perfect rows facing our makeshift altar. Mrs. Peterson from next door appeared with armfuls of flowers from her garden, insisting they were extras that would just go to waste otherwise. "This is what a real family looks like," Sarah said, watching our friends work together, people who show up. By noon, the space was unrecognizable. What had started as our simple backyard had become something magical. The sunflowers glowed against the rustic mason jars. The fairy lights created a canopy of stars, even in daylight, and the borrowed tables draped with ivory linens looked elegant despite their humble origins. Tommy Rodriguez, Jake's friend from high school, who'd recently started his own photography business, arrived early to capture the setup. "Madison, this is incredible," he said, already snapping photos. "Do you mind if I document the whole day? This would be amazing for my portfolio. And honestly, I just want to capture how beautiful this is." Of course. I told him, touched by his enthusiasm, I had no idea that decision would change everything. As I got ready in Sarah's bedroom, surrounded by my chosen family of friends, I kept expecting to feel the absence of my biological family like a physical ache. Instead, I felt surrounded by love. Sarah's mum, who had essentially adopted me during college, helped me into my dress, a simple but elegant design I'd found at a boutique for $300. It wasn't a designer gown, but when I looked in the mirror, I felt beautiful. "Your mother doesn't know what she's missing," Sarah's mum whispered as she fastened the buttons. "You look radiant, sweetheart." The ceremony itself was everything I'd hoped for and more. As I walked down our makeshift aisle, a simple path marked by sunflowers in mason jars, I saw Jake waiting for me under the oak tree, and everything else faded away. The 60 people who had chosen to celebrate with us felt like a stadium full of love. Our friend Michael, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding, kept the ceremony personal and heartfelt. When Jake and I exchanged the vows we'd written ourselves, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. We talked about building a life based on love instead of expectations, about choosing each other every day, about creating our own definition of success. "I promise to love you not despite our simple life, but because of the beautiful simplicity we've chosen together," Jake said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. When I spoke, I looked out at the faces of people who had shown up for us, our chosen family who valued love over luxury, and said, I promise to never let other people's definitions of worthy diminish what we've built together. The moment Tommy captured that would eventually change everything happened during our first dance. We'd chosen at last by Etta James, and as we swayed under the fairy lights with our friends and chosen families surrounding us, something magical occurred. The golden hour light filtered through the oak leaves. The gentle breeze carried the scent of Sarah's mum's apple pies, cooling on the dessert table, and every person there was genuinely, completely happy for us. Tommy later told me he'd never seen anything like it. The pure joy on everyone's faces, the way the simple decorations looked ethereal in the natural light, the obvious love that filled every corner of the space. He kept shooting, capturing candid moments of laughter, tears of joy, and the kind of authentic celebration that no amount of money can buy. The reception was perfect in its imperfection. Jake's mum's apple pies were a hit. The playlist we'd curated ourselves kept everyone dancing, and the speeches from our friends were funny, heartfelt, and real. There were no formal protocols, no rigid timelines, just people celebrating love in its purest form. As the evening wound down and our guests helped us clean up, another difference from my brother's wedding, where hired staff handled everything, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced at any family gathering. This was what celebration felt like when it came from genuine love rather than obligation. 3 days later, I was grading papers in my classroom when my phone started buzzing with notifications. At first, I ignored them. Students often tagged me in social media posts. But when my phone rang with a call from Tommy, I picked up. Madison, you need to check Facebook right now, he said, his voice excited. Something incredible is happening. I opened the app to find that the video montage Tommy had created from our wedding photos and footage had been shared far beyond our friend group. Sarah had posted it with the caption, "This is what true love looks like. No mansion needed. Sometimes the most beautiful celebrations come from the heart, not the wallet." The video had been shared over 1,000 times in just 3 days, with comments pouring in from strangers around the world. "This is the most beautiful wedding I've ever seen." Read one comment with hundreds of likes. "This couple understands what marriage is really about," said another. "I'm crying happy tears. This is love in its purest form." But it was just the beginning. By the end of the week, the video had exploded across multiple platforms. TikTok users were stitching it with their own stories about choosing meaningful celebrations over expensive ones. Instagram accounts dedicated to budget weddings were reposting it. Pinterest was flooded with pins titled "Backyard Wedding Goals" and "How to Have a Beautiful Wedding on Any Budget." The comments section became a space where people shared their own stories about family pressure, wedding industry expectations, and choosing authenticity over appearances. "My family said the same thing about my beach wedding," wrote one bride. "Now they ask me for advice on planning meaningful celebrations." Another comment read, "This video reminded me that love doesn't have a price tag. Thank you for showing us what really matters." Local news stations picked up the story within 10 days. Channel 7's morning show called it "The Wedding That Proves Love Doesn't Need a Big Budget." And suddenly, Tommy and I were being asked to do interviews about our viral wedding video. We never intended for this to go viral. I told the reporter honestly, we just wanted to celebrate our love in a way that felt authentic to us. The interviewer, a woman named Lisa Chen, smiled warmly. "What do you think resonates so much with people about your wedding?" "I think people are tired of being told that their love isn't valid unless it meets certain expensive standards." I said, "We proved that the most beautiful celebrations come from genuine joy, not big budgets." Jake, who was much more comfortable with tools than cameras, added, "We built something beautiful together, just like we're building our marriage, with our own hands, our own resources, and a lot of love." The segment aired on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, my phone was ringing non-stop. Good Morning America wanted to do a feature. Wedding magazines were reaching out for interviews. Budget wedding blogs were asking to share our story, but the calls I wasn't expecting started coming in around the same time. My mother was the first. "Madison, honey, I just saw the most wonderful news segment about a local wedding, and I could have sworn was that you..." I stared at my phone for a full 30 seconds before answering. "Yes. Mom, that was me. At my embarrassing backyard wedding that you refused to attend." "Oh, sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your father and I were never embarrassed. We were just concerned about the weather. You know how unpredictable September can be." The lie was so blatant I almost laughed. "Mom, you specifically used the word embarrassed. You said you were embarrassed for me." "Well, I just meant, Madison, the important thing is that we're so proud of you now. This is wonderful publicity for the family. My bridge club is so impressed that my daughter's wedding was featured on the news. There it was. The only thing that mattered to her was how this reflected on her. Not that I was happy. Not that I'd created something beautiful, but that it made her look good to her friends." David called an hour later. "Madison, Mom told me about the news segment. Congratulations. Emma and I are so excited to finally see the video. We were so disappointed we couldn't make it." "You weren't disappointed, David. You chose not to come because you thought it would be embarrassing. That's not... I mean, we had legitimate conflicts." "What conflicts? Be specific." Silence. "Then, look, maybe we made some mistakes in our scheduling, but the important thing is how proud we are now. This is incredible exposure. Emma's thinking about reaching out to some of her marketing contacts. We could really help you capitalize on this moment." The word capitalize made my stomach turn. Even now, they were thinking about how to profit from my happiness rather than simply celebrating it. My grandmother called that evening. "Madison, dear, I had no idea your little wedding would become such a sensation." Mrs. Williams from my book club showed me the video on her computer, and I must say, it looked quite lovely. Quite lovely, the same wedding she'd dismissed as inappropriate for her age just 2 weeks earlier. One by one, they all called. The aunt with the sudden book club conflict, the uncle who hadn't been feeling well, the cousins with their mysterious prior commitments. Each conversation followed the same pattern: excitement about the viral video, claims that they'd always supported my choices, and transparent attempts to associate themselves with my sudden fame. The most painful call came from my mother 3 days later. "Madison, I've been thinking, and I believe we should do a follow-up interview together. Mother of the bride perspective. You know, I could talk about how proud I've always been of your independent spirit and creative vision." "Creative vision," I repeated incredulously. "Mom, you called my wedding embarrassing. You said backyard weddings were for poor people. You refused to come to your own daughter's wedding. Now, sweetheart, I think you're misremembering. I was just concerned about your happiness. And clearly I was wrong to worry. You've created something wonderful, and I want to support you now." Now, I emphasized, "You want to support me now that it makes you look good." "Madison, that's not fair. Family supports each other, and I'm trying to do that now. Where was that support 2 weeks ago when I needed it?" The silence that followed was telling. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to the one she used when she wasn't getting her way. "Madison, I understand you're upset, but holding grudges isn't healthy. We're family, and we need to move forward together. This could be a wonderful opportunity for all of us." That phrase, opportunity for all of us, crystallized everything for me, even now, faced with undeniable evidence that I had created something beautiful and meaningful. She couldn't simply apologize or admit she'd been wrong. Instead, she wanted to insert herself into my success story. I need some time to think, I told her, and hung up before she could respond. Jake found me in our backyard that evening, sitting under the oak tree where we'd gotten married 2 weeks earlier. The fairy lights were still up, and in the gathering dusk, they created the same magical atmosphere that had captivated viewers around the world. "Rough day of phone calls?" he asked, settling beside me on the grass. I told him about every conversation, every transparent attempt to rewrite history, every suggestion that they'd always been supportive. As I spoke, I realized that my initial hurt was transforming into something else, a clarity I'd never experienced before. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said finally. "I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just, done. Done trying to earn their approval, done hoping they'll suddenly become the family I've always wanted them to be, done letting their opinions define my worth." Jake reached for my hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with mine. "What do you want to do about it?" I looked around our backyard, which had become a symbol not just of our love, but of the life we'd chosen to build together, the life that valued authenticity over appearance, love over luxury, real relationships over social climbing. I want to help other couples who are facing the same pressures we faced, I said slowly. All those comments on the video, there are so many people who feel like their love isn't valid unless it meets someone else's expensive standards. Maybe we can change that. Over the next week, Jake and I made several decisions that would reshape our lives in ways I never could have imagined. We turned down most of the media requests, keeping only the ones that felt aligned with our message about authentic celebration. We started a blog called Budget Weddings, Big Love, where we shared practical tips for planning meaningful celebrations without breaking the bank. Most importantly, I finally had the conversations I'd been avoiding with my family. When my mother called again, insisting we do a joint interview, I was ready for her. "Mom, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I said, "You had a choice 2 weeks ago. You could have supported your daughter's happiness, or you could have protected your social image. You chose your image. That choice had consequences. And those consequences don't disappear just because the outcome turned out differently than you expected. Madison, you're being dramatic. We're family, and family forgives each other. You're right that family forgives each other, but forgiveness doesn't mean pretending things didn't happen. You weren't there for one of the most important days of my life because you were embarrassed by me. That happened. It was your choice. And it hurt me deeply. So what are you saying? That you're cutting us off forever. I'm saying that I'm not going to pretend your absence didn't matter just because my wedding turned out to be successful. I'm saying that if you want to be part of my life going forward, it needs to be because you genuinely want to support me, not because associating with me makes you look good." The conversation ended with her hanging up on me, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about standing up for myself. Similar conversations followed with David, my grandmother, and the various relatives who'd suddenly rediscovered their love for me. Some of them got angry when I refused to play along with their revisionist history. Others tried guilt, reminding me of family loyalty and the importance of forgiveness. But I'd learned something important from our wedding's viral success. Authentic relationships are worth more than comfortable lies. The people who had shown up for us, who had celebrated our love without conditions or judgments, were my real family. They were the ones whose opinions mattered, whose support meant something, whose love didn't come with strings attached. 3 months later, Jake and I received a wedding invitation in the mail. My cousin Jennifer, One of the ones who'd had a prior commitment for our wedding was getting married in the spring. The invitation was elegant, expensive, and formal, exactly the kind of wedding my family valued. "Are you going to go?" Jake asked when I showed him the invitation. I thought about it for a long moment, imagining the conversations, the careful pretense that nothing had changed, the expectation that I would simply slip back into my old role as the family disappointment who'd gotten lucky. "No," I said finally. "I think I have a prior commitment that day." Jake raised an eyebrow. "We don't have anything scheduled." I smiled and pointed to our backyard, where we were planning to host our first budget wedding workshop for engaged couples who wanted to plan meaningful celebrations without going into debt. "We do now," I said. "We're going to be here, helping people create the weddings of their dreams, surrounded by people who choose to show up, and for the first time in my life, that felt like exactly where I belonged."